Hi, I'm Noel from Creation Effects, and today I'll be showing you how to use the ocean effect for Adobe After Effects. This is a really fun effect that lets you convert normal 2D footage of some water into a huge 3D body of water that you'll be able to animate your camera to fly over and look at it from different angles. You'll be able to put a title or logo above the water, or add other 3D elements or whatever you want. It's very flexible. It comes with a ton of customization options. And it comes with over 50 different water textures to choose from. So you can make anything from pools to rivers to oceans. And it also includes some bonus effects like splashes and reflections and atmospheric haze. I think it's really easy to use and it looks really cool. So let's get started with a tutorial. First thing I want to tell you about is how to open this zip file that you download. There is a right and wrong way to do it. If you're on a Windows machine, you'll need to right-click it and choose the Extract All option. Otherwise, you could get errors when you open the project. And if you're on a Mac, you can just double-click it to open it. So then you'll just open the ocean.aep file in After Effects. It's normal to get this alert saying that After Effects will convert the project, so just click OK. And the first thing you'll see are some instructions, and there are actually instructions comps like this inside all of the folders, so you can just open those up and read what you're supposed to do. But if you're following along with the video, you won't need to read those. I'm just going to go through the 3 steps here, and I'm going to try and stick to the need-to-know stuff first so you can quickly make your animation, and then I'm going to go over these extra effects in here. So step 1, this is where you choose your water texture that you're going to use. In this water textures folder here, there are over 50 different water textures. You can see that they're in categories. So we've got horizons, oceans, ponds, pools, and rivers. And you can just go through those and pick whatever one you like. You can double click it to preview it. And there's a lot of variety in here. There's different angles, different colors, different levels of turbulence in the water. So there's something here for every kind of project, I think. These clips are all taken from pixabay.com, which is a website that offers stock footage for free under the Creative Commons license. So you're free to use these in your projects, whether they're commercial or non-commercial. And if you have any questions about the licensing, you can go to pixabay.com and see what they say over there. And also, if you don't find something that you like in here, you're free to use your own footage as well. You can buy a stock footage clip or shoot something yourself, and that'll work just as well. Most of these are HD. You can see 1920 by 500 pixels, and some of them are 4K, and you can see they've got 4K in the name here. There's a lot more HD clips than there are 4K clips. If you're making a 4K animation, you're not out of luck because you can use an HD clip in your 4K animation, and vice versa. If you're making an HD animation, you can choose one of these 4K clips. It doesn't really matter. I would just go through all of them and pick the one that you like the best. And if it's an HD clip, let's find one here. We can use this one. This one's HD, so that means we have to put it into the HD folder here. So I'll open that up. There's this comp called Put Water Texture here. So we'll just drag it into there. We can delete the texture that's already in there. And then you're done for step 1. These other 2 comps, these are optional. If you have a background image or footage, you can put it in here. And then the horizon water, that will have this comp in there by default, so it just uses the same texture. I'll show you this later, we'll talk about that. Okay, so step 1 is done. We'll close all this. Let's go to step 2. Step 2 is shaping your waves. So since I put my clip in the HD folder in step 1, then I'm going to open up the HD folder in step 2. And you can see there's this comp called water texture. I'll open that and I'll play it. And you can see it applied this wave shape to the top of our water texture. And if you select the control layer and go to the effect controls panel, you'll see a number of controls that you can use to customize that shape. So the goal here is to match this shape to the water texture down here. So you can increase the turbulence amount and the turbulence scale and the detail level, how fast the wave evolves, and the horizontal travel speed. So right now this is set to a negative number, which means that the wave shape is going to be moving to the left. I think, yeah, so our waves actually move to the right. So we would want to try and match that. I'll use a positive number. And I might add more detail to this. And that looks pretty good. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the reason that this is cropped on the bottom and the top is because that in our final comp, this texture is going to be tiled. So it's just going to repeat itself horizontally. And in order to hide the seams, the edges get blended together. And that includes the top and bottom edge, which produces an unwanted result. If you do see some weird strip of water floating above your water texture, you can just come back to this comp and you can crop it a little bit more. You can also feather the edge here. Sometimes that looks good. It really just depends on which water texture you choose and what your animation is like. Okay, moving on to step 3. Regardless of what the resolution was of the texture you chose in step 1, if you were going to make a 4K animation, you'd be working in this folder. Otherwise, open the HD folder and open the water main comp inside. And what we're looking at here, if we scroll down, you can see we've got 15 different copies of your water texture, and they're arranged in a row in 3D space. And actually, if I use my camera tool, I can orbit around and we can look at it from different angles. If I keep orbiting, you can see that these are just 2D layers arranged in a row. So the first water layer up here is the closest to the camera, and the last one is way back here. And then behind that water layer is your horizon water. Let me isolate that. The horizon water, if you remember from step 1, is whatever you put into this comp here, and by default it just has this pre-comp in there, so it has whatever texture you chose. Now I put this separate comp in there because there are situations where you might want a different texture, particularly if you chose a texture that is a close-up shot of water. That might look a little strange if you're using it as your horizon, since the horizon is supposed to be so far away. So I gave you that option, and in fact, in the water textures folder, there's this horizons folder with a bunch of different horizon shots just for that purpose. And if you do use one of those, you might have to add some color correction to make it match the other water layers in your shot. And the other difference between the horizon water layer and the other water layers is the horizon water doesn't have that wave shape at the top of it. So it's just a straight edge, like a horizon should be. And behind your horizon water layer is your background layer. So that was whatever you put into this comp. It'll show up behind everything else. So at the moment we just have these 15 water layers, and it's really easy to add water layers. You can just select one of these blue layers or a bunch of them and then just duplicate them. So if you go to your edit menu, you can see what the shortcut is for duplicate. It's Command D on my Mac, and I usually drag them down to the bottom. And all that does is it creates more layers and it pushes them back even further in the distance. And you can keep doing that as many times as you want. I usually had about 100 layers in those animations that you saw in the demo video. So you can do more or less, depending on your patience. The more layers you have, the longer it's going to take to process and to render. I'm going to go back to 15 layers. Keep it fast. Okay, and since we're working in this HD comp, by default, all of the textures used in this comp are HD textures. These ones that are in our HD folder from step 1. And we talked about how you can use a 4K texture and use it in your HD comp. So let me show you how you would swap those out. And actually, I'm going to open the 4K comp. Let's say we're making a 4K animation and we want to replace the 4K textures with our HD texture that we chose. So what we can do is select all of our water layers, not your horizon water layer, and then open up the step 2 folder and the HD folder, and we want this water texture here, which has the wave shape on it. And we'll select that, and with both selected, we'll hold down the Alt or Option key and then click and drag that texture onto any one of those layers. And that swaps out the source of those layers. And you can see we've got a bunch of stripes because the pattern is repeating itself, and I'll show you how to fix that in a moment. I'm going to go back to my HD comp. And we can use that same technique to swap out the horizon water or the background. We would just swap those out with one of these pre-comps in the step 1 folder. Finally, we have this control layer at the top. And again, in the effect controls panel, we've got a ton of controls for customizing our scene. So our first section of controls are these transform controls. We have scale on the X and Y dimensions. We have spread. This value is in pixels. So right now, all of these water textures are 300 pixels apart. We have X, Y, and Z position. So these are actually controlling the position of this control layer here. And all of the water layers are parented to the control layer. So whatever the control layer does, the water layers will follow. And we also have these increase with distance controls, which are similar to these position controls, but they affect the layers more and more the further they are away in the distance. And the next one, this one's really important, add random X position. A lot of the water textures are either darker on one side than they are on the other, or they have a reflection, or they have some sort of identifiable feature, so that when these textures are repeated again and again, you start to see a pattern. It may show up as stripes in your ocean. So to fix that, you can give them random X position. I usually crank this up to about 1,000. And if you don't like how they turned out, you can just enter in a new value into the random seed, and it'll give you new random positions here. So that's how you can fix unwanted patterns in your ocean. Next we have rotation. We have X, Y, and Z rotation. You may remember when we orbited the camera to the side, all of the layers were at an angle, so that's this 45-degree X rotation angle. You can also add X, Y, and Z rotation. They affect each water layer individually, not the control layer. And then we've got the same thing, increase with distance, which can produce some pretty funky results. These work better if you don't have any random X position. So you can, I don't know, do some pretty creative stuff with that. Next we have these extend edge controls. Every one of these water layers has a CC reptile effect on them. And what that does is it makes these water layers repeat themselves horizontally. Let me remove that rotation. And I'm going to zoom my camera way out and bring the camera up. So now, let me hide this horizon layer. You can see that each of these layers gets wider and wider the further away they are from the camera. If you've got an extend left edge control and an extend right edge control, and these, hold down shift when you're clicking and dragging these, and they'll move much more. You can see that this control just adds an equal amount to every one of the layers. And then we've got increase with distance, which actually affects the layers more and more the further they are away from the camera. So depending on the angle of your camera and where it's pointed, you may have to extend these edges. Try not to extend these edges any more than you need to, because it will eat into the render time. One more important thing to note about these extend edge controls: with this increase with distance feature, layers can start to get really long if they go pretty far back in the distance, which will happen if you've added a bunch of layers. They can push back really far and they can extend really long to the point where After Effects just can't handle it anymore. So as you're adding more and more layers, you may eventually get an error message that says that the layer exceeds the maximum size. You may have to just click OK a number of times for as many layers that exceeded that limit. And eventually the errors will stop popping up, so then you can just decrease these values to an amount that After Effects can handle. All right, our next set of controls are the wave controls. These are easiest to see from the right side. So if you go to your 3D view pop-up here, you click on that and you can click on right and zoom out a little bit. And so we're looking at the scene from the right side. Here's our camera pointed this way, and here are all of our water layers. Let me actually duplicate some of these so we have more to look at. Okay. And I'll go to my control layer and I'll increase the amplitude. And then if I scrub through, hopefully you can see what's happening here. We have this oscillation of the layers. So they're actually moving up and down in kind of this wave form. The waves are going toward the camera. And then we've got a number of controls here that we can use to customize that movement. If you don't want that movement at all, just set amplitude to 0. Wavelength, that can widen or narrow the length of the waves. It's important to remember that wavelength, the higher it is, the more narrow it is. So you would actually use a lower value to widen the length of the waves. Frequency oscillation, this one is the speed that those layers go up and down. And each of these affect the other. So if you change this, you may have to adjust this to get the look that you're after. So our next control is time shift random seed. I should explain first that all of the water textures in this template are about 10 seconds, but they will loop continuously and seamlessly for the duration of the comp, which this comp is 10 minutes long. So in order to keep all of these layers from playing in sync with each other, they've been given a random time shift. So each layer is offset a little bit randomly, and you can change the random playback of those by adjusting this value here. Just enter in any different value, and each layer will play back from a different frame. All right, next we have horizon controls. Our horizon layer down here at the bottom has its own set of controls. These controls up here at the top in the transform controls will not affect the horizon layer. So in order to adjust that horizon layer, you would just go down here to the horizon controls. And you've got all the same stuff, scale and position and rotation, and you can extend the left and right edge as much as you want. The most important thing to pay attention to with the horizon is its Y position. And you can see if I lower that value, the horizon moves up. It's very easy to forget about this horizon layer, and if you adjust these other water layers, they might end up covering up this horizon layer, and it's just very easy to forget about that horizon. It might be down here and you don't even notice it. So just try and pay attention to where it is on the y-axis. You typically want it to be just barely visible above that last water layer. And next we have the background controls. These affect that last layer, the background layer. You could adjust the background layer just using the transform controls on the layer, but it's probably easier just to use these controls here when you're doing your other customizations. So that does it for the control layer. I'm going to close this comp and go back to our project panel. Let's take a look at these extra effects. You may or may not use these, and if you don't think you will, then feel free to stop the video now and start working on your animation. But if you'd like to learn more, just keep watching. I'll talk about this haze effect first because it's the easiest to apply. I'll open up the haze comp. One thing to note about this haze effect is that you need a control layer and a layer named camera 1 in the comp where you use the haze effect, or it won't work. So your main comp should already have both of these, but just in case you rename them to something else, you will need to restore those original names back before you copy the effect over. And then the first thing that you'll need to do is select and copy this haze control layer. And you can just go to your main comp and paste it in there. You can put it right above the other control layer, that's fine. And then go back and select the haze effect layer. And if you looked in the effect controls panel, you'll see this tint effect. Just select that and copy it. Go to your main comp and then select all of your water layers, including your horizon water, and paste. So what that does is it tints all of the water layers the color that you choose, and it affects each layer more and more the further away it is from the camera. So the result is the layers sort of fade into the background in the distance. If you select your haze control layer, you can change the color. This water visibility, typically this would be the distance from your camera layer to the last water layer. And you might not know what that is, so you can just experiment with different values here. This value is in pixels. And then maximum tint percentage. If your layer is this distance or farther, it'll be tinted 90%. And then the minimum tint percentage, this is the amount that a layer would be tinted if it were 0 pixels from your camera or right in front of your camera. Okay, next we have, we'll do splashes next. I'll open up the splashes comp and play it back. And you can see this has just random splashes, water droplets bursting up from the bottom of the frame. And you can use the controls on the control layer to customize the drops and the splash. And if you select the CC particle world effect on there, you can see the particle producer here. And if you scrub through, you can see how it randomly moves back and forth and changes width to add a variety of splashes all along that bottom edge. If you want to, you can duplicate that layer to get more splashes. Just be sure and offset it about 10 seconds so the splashes don't occur on top of each other. So once you've customized those and you have them the way you like it, you can then just drag the splashes comp into your main comp and enable 3D for the layer, and then you can position it behind a water layer or wherever you want. Just be sure that if you drag this into your comp, you don't place it in between any of these water layers, because what that'll do is push back all of these water layers so that there would be a gap in between the layers, which you don't want. So you can just keep this above or below the water layers in the layer order, and then you can still position it. As long as this is 3D, you can still position this in between water layers in 3D space. Another option, if you would rather have these splashes coming out from behind all of these water layers, you could open this water texture with splashes comp. Essentially all it does is it combines the texture and the splashes into one comp. So then you can go to your water main comp and you could then replace your water layers however many you want, or all of them. Just select them and then do that same alt drag technique where you swap out these textures with this one. But a problem you'll run into is that since this texture is so much taller, it's going to appear at a different level height-wise. So one thing you can do, just select one of these layers that's close to the camera, and then just mark the height of where that layer is. And you can do that by adding a ruler guide. So to make the ruler show up, you can do Command or Control R, and then just drag down from the ruler to create this guide and just put it at the top of that layer. Now we can select however many water layers we want to replace. I'll just do the first few. Hold down Alt or Option and drag that texture on there. So you can see the water texture, it must be down here. It came in too low. So we can just, with these layers still selected, we can reveal the position property by hitting the P key, and we'll just drag them all up until that water texture is back to where it was. And then we can unsolo that layer. Okay, moving on to this reflection effect here. This one is it's a hairy beast of an effect. It requires a lot of pre-comps and some setup work on your part. And I really wanted to make this a sort of one-size-fits-all copy and paste effect, but it just doesn't work like that. So it's going to take a little bit of time to set up, but it can produce some pretty cool results. So let me show you how to do it. First of all, you want to finish customizing your scene in the water main comp before you start working on the reflection. So make sure that your camera is all animated, and I'm going to open this reflection comp to show you what it looks like. So what this effect does is it takes everything above the horizon line and it makes a mirror image of it down here. And it adds some warp to it using your water as a displacement map. And it adds some depth of field blurring that matches the depth of field in your scene. So the first thing you're going to want to do is open up your water main comp. And you can see how the foreground is blurred and the background is blurred. And we want everything to be in focus. So we need to turn off the depth of field. We can do that by double clicking the camera and turning the blur level down to 0. And in this comp, we only want the water to be showing. So we can scroll down and make sure your background is hidden. If you have any other elements sticking out of your water, make sure those are hidden as well. I'll close that. And if I open my pre-comps folder and my water displacement map, you can see that this comp, the water main comp, is already in here by default. So that's what we need. I'll close that. Next, we'll take the water main comp and duplicate it, and I'll call the duplicate background. And I'm going to drag that into my pre-comps folder, and I'll open that up. And this one's sort of the opposite. We want to hide the water layers and only show the background. So I'll select all the water layers, unhide the background. So it doesn't have to be your background in here. If it's text that you want reflected, then that's what you would have showing in this comp. I'll close that. And now drag that background comp into this comp named Put Source of Reflection Here. I can close that now. Okay, next go to the reflection comp. Your reflection is on this layer here. And here you've got your water layer, and then you've got your blur map, which I'll show you in a little bit. I'm going to hide all of these effects on the reflection layer. You don't have to do that, but it makes it easier to see what you're working with. And then I'll select this reflection control layer. And in this example, the horizon is already set to the right place. But normally that's the first thing you want to do is define where your horizon is. So you would play with this horizon Y position control and adjust it so that it's right where your horizon is. And if it's hard to see and you're not really sure where the horizon is, you can unhide your water layer, and I'll bring down the opacity of this layer. Okay, so you can see the horizon of your water is right down there. So back on the control layer, I can adjust that value until it matches. Good enough. Hide my water and turn the opacity back up. So now you'll want to turn those effects back on, just so we can see it clearly. I'm going to go back here and turn off the camera lens blur and the displacement map effect. And I'll turn this down to 0. Okay, so you can stretch the reflection vertically like that. And you can increase the vertical blur. Kind of smooths out the reflection. And then you've got your horizontal and vertical displacement. For that, you have to turn this back on. So it's looking at the luminance values of your water layer and displacing the pixels in this reflection based on those luminance values. If you want, you can go to your reflection layer and open up the displacement map effect and experiment with different channels. So you can displace pixels based on the red, green, or blue values of your water layer if you want. Because different water textures will produce different results, and sometimes using the red, green, or blue channel might look better than using the luminance, but you can play around with that if you want. I'm going to leave it at luminance, and you can also crop the bottom and feather it. It's already feathered quite a bit. And then these last ones, transform controls. Sometimes your water texture might be lighter on the top and darker on the bottom, or vice versa, and the result of that sometimes is that the reflection will be slanted. Or sometimes if the water texture is too dark, the whole reflection will be pushed down or pushed up, and you can compensate for those unwanted shifts in position or slanting of the reflection using these controls down here. So horizontal and vertical offset, or if it's slanted, you can skew it here, and feel free to say the word out loud as you skew it, because skew is a really fun word to say. And then lastly, there's this depth of field blur amount. So you can turn that up, and we have to have the camera lens blur effect on for that. So you can see that's way too much. So this is looking at this blur map to determine which areas to blur and which areas to leave in focus. If you double click that blur map, and you can also find the blur map inside this pre-comps folder here, you can see we've got this grayscale gradient here, and you can select the control layer here, and you can adjust this gradient and the colors. Everything that's black will be in focus. Everything that's white will be blurred the most. So you can adjust the plane of focus. You can move it up or down or extend it, whatever you want to do. By default, your horizon position is already set if you set it in the reflection comp like I showed you before. So the only thing you would need to do is set where that plane of focus is. And you may want to go back to your water main comp and turn your blur level back up just so you can see where your plane of focus was. Just be sure to turn it back off again when you're done looking at it. And once you're happy with your reflection, you'll need to export this comp as its own video file. And then you're going to bring it back into After Effects and composite it over your water inside your main comp. So you would go to composition, and I actually tried using the render queue in After Effects, and it was taking insanely long. And I don't know what was going on with that, but when I tried Adobe Media Encoder, it only took a minute. So I would recommend that you do that. And I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'm going to skip ahead. All right, I'm back, and I exported the video. One thing that I forgot to mention is if you animated your camera to move in this water main comp, then your horizon line is likely going to be changing throughout your shot. So if that's the case, you'll need to animate your horizon Y position so that horizon line stays in sync with the horizon line in your scene. Once you've exported your reflection comp, you can import it back into After Effects. Just go to File and Import. And here it is. And then just drag it into your comp. You don't want to ever put layers in between the water layers. Keep them above or below. If you put something in between them, it's going to push back all of them and create a gap in between the water layers. Let me turn on the background. Oh, it's already on. I just need to set the blending mode for this layer. So you can make that screen is probably best, but you can experiment. And if it's too intense, just turn down the opacity. And one other thing we got to remember to do is turn that blur level back up on the camera layer. Oh, and After Effects always exports all of your marker notes into your comp, so when you bring them back in, you get a bunch of these different notes in here. I don't know why it does that. There's probably a setting to turn it off, but I haven't figured out what it is. Just right-click any of those markers, and you can do delete all markers, and that gets rid of them. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to show you. I hope you liked the effect. Be sure to check out the other stuff at creationeffects.com. There are custom 3D books, auroras, there's custom flocks of birds and insects and fish, VHS effects, old film effects, glitch effects, text effects, and much more. So please check it out. Thanks for watching.